They say most people who die in car crashes were only a few minutes away from safety. I guess that makes sense. Death doesn't knock with a warning, it just shows up, right when you think you're almost home. My name is Emily, and I was just trying to make it home for Christmas. It was late afternoon, December 22nd. I left Denver in a rush, the same way I lived my life. Late, distracted, and running on caffeine. The plan was simple. Make the 5-hour drive through the mountains to my mom's house in Glenwood Springs. I hadn't seen her in 6 months. I hadn't seen anyone really. Work had swallowed me whole, like it always does when you're underpaid, overqualified, and living in a world that makes you feel disposable. I remember zipping up my coat, tossing my overnight bag in the back seat, scraping the windshield half-heartedly. The snow had already started. Light, harmless flurries that looked almost festive against the windshield. But I'd grown up in Colorado. I should have known better. Snow never stays light for long in the Rockies. As I pulled onto I-70 West, I called Mom. "Hey, I'm on my way, should be there by 9, maybe 10. She sighed. "You sure this storm isn't gonna get worse?" "It's nothing, just a little snow," I said, forcing a laugh. "I've driven through worse." I hadn't. But what was I supposed to say? "Hey Mom, I feel like something bad's about to happen." No one wants to hear that before the holidays. We said our I love yous. I hung up. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I spoke to her with a full voice. The next time she heard me, I'd be barely breathing. The drive started fine. Radio on low, heater humming. I had my usual thoughts. How tired I was. How unfair life felt lately. Working 2 jobs and still drowning. Watching college friends buy homes while I scraped together rent. Getting ghosted by a guy I thought might actually stay. And still, I had to pretend I was okay, that I was strong, that I didn't need help. Because in this world, when you're a woman, especially a young one, no one listens until you scream. And by the time you're screaming, it's usually too late. The deeper I drove into the mountains, the darker everything got. Not just the sky, the energy. You know that eerie stillness, like the whole world is holding its breath? That's what it felt like. The kind of quiet that makes you check your rearview mirror for no reason, like something's following you that you can't see. At one point, I passed a snowplow pulled off to the side. The driver stared at me like he knew something I didn't. Maybe he did. The snow turned heavy fast. My tires started to slip. I slowed down, leaned forward, gripped the wheel. But the road kept disappearing under white. No other cars, no lights, no signal. Just me and God and a stretch of highway that felt like it never ended. I thought about turning around, but I was already halfway through the pass. There was no signal to call for weather updates, no safe place to stop. And besides, I didn't want to look weak. Isn't that what society teaches us? Keep pushing, keep driving, even when the road is clearly telling you to stop. Somewhere past mile marker 208, I lost control. 1 second I was gripping the wheel. The next, ice, spin, screech, and then, silence. The car flipped once, maybe twice. It all blurred together. When it finally stopped, I was upside down, bleeding, trapped, alone. But I didn't know the worst part yet. The worst part wasn't the crash. It was knowing that no one knew where I was. And the snow, it just kept falling. The last sound I remember wasn't the crash, it was the scream I didn't even realize came from my own throat. The tires hit a patch of black ice, and everything turned slow motion. The steering wheel locked up. The car slid sideways. I slammed the brakes, too late. The world outside my windshield twisted like a nightmare. The guardrail appeared, then disappeared under me. And then, the sound. That high-pitched, bone-deep screech of metal against metal, followed by silence. Then the fall. I don't know how far I dropped. 20 feet, 30, it felt endless. The car spun mid-air like a coin flipped by God himself. The seatbelt cut into my chest. My head slammed the side window. And then, impact. A violent, suffocating stop. Everything went black. When I came to, it was dark. Not just night dark, cave dark, grave dark. I couldn't move at first. My body didn't feel like mine. There was blood in my mouth. My right leg burned so bad I couldn't think. I could smell gas, glass, something metallic. The car was upside down, crushed in. I was still strapped to the seat, my arms trembling, head throbbing, one shoe gone. I looked around, dazed. No headlights, no taillights, just cold, freezing, silent cold. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb and shaking. The screen flickered. No signal. 7% battery. No bars. No help. No one. I was buried beneath snow and trees. Off a mountain pass where no one drives after dark, not in a storm like this. I screamed. Nothing. My voice sounded like it was swallowed by the forest. I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. Tried the window, jammed shut. That's when it hit me. No one knew where I was. Not Mom, not my boss, not a single soul. I was 26 years old, and I might die alone in a frozen car, broken and forgotten, 3 days before Christmas. And all I could think was, this can't be it. This can't be how it ends. But deep down, I wasn't sure. I screamed until my throat burned, but all I heard was my own voice echoing back at me, over and over, like the mountain was mocking me. No headlights in the distance, no sound of an engine, no footsteps, just the wind brushing snow over the wreckage like it was trying to erase me. Panic hit me like another crash. I clawed at the door again, slamming my shoulder into it. Nothing. I kicked at the windshield with my good leg. Glass cracked, but didn't break. I grabbed my phone, still no signal. 6% battery now. I turned on the flashlight, waving it through the shattered back window, blinking SOS through my tears like I thought someone might see. No one did. The sun disappeared behind the mountains fast, like it had no interest in sticking around to see what would happen to me. And then came the cold. Not grab a sweater cold. Kill you slow cold. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes you feel like your blood is turning to ice. I found an old hoodie in the back seat and wrapped it around my legs. It didn't help much. My fingers went numb. My lips cracked. And worse, I was already thirsty, and starving, and dizzy from the pain in my leg. No food. No water. No clue how deep I was in this ravine. No one coming. I don't know how long I sat there, breathing clouds, and trying not to cry too loud. Eventually, I stopped moving, stopped thinking. I just sat, frozen, silent, forgotten. And that's when I reached for it. The rosary, a gift from my grandmother. I'd kept it in my purse for years, more out of guilt than faith. But that night, I clutched it like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to life. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't prayed since I was 15. But I held each bead between shaking fingers, whispering the only thing I could. Please God, please. Over and over, not because I was holy, but because I had nothing else left. There was no rescue coming, no miracle yet. Just me, the wreckage, the snow, the silence, and maybe, just maybe, God. By the second day, time stopped making sense. There was only cold and pain, and this aching, hollow hunger gnawing through me like something alive. My lips were cracked open, bleeding. My tongue felt thick and dry like paper. Every breath hurt. My body was giving up, but my mind? That was worse. My mind was slipping somewhere else entirely. I remember blinking, and suddenly, I was in my mother's kitchen. There was sunlight and warmth and the smell of cinnamon. I was 8 again, laughing, eating Christmas pastries with powdered sugar on top. My mom was humming some old hymn, the one she always sang when she cooked during Advent. She touched my cheek and said, "Emily, slow down or you'll choke." I smiled, reached for another cookie, but then, I blinked again. Gone, all of it. Back to darkness, ice. The crumpled roof of the car pressing against my head, and the taste in my mouth wasn't sugar, it was blood. That's when I broke. The rosary slipped from my frozen fingers and hit the roof of the car, just a soft clink, but it sounded like the end of something. And I cried, not quiet tears, not graceful movie scene crying. I sobbed, alone, filthy, hurt, hungry, so far from anyone who even knew I was alive. I curled up as best I could, arms wrapped tight around myself. My leg was burning, maybe infected. I couldn't tell. I just knew I was slipping, mentally, physically, spiritually, and in the middle of that spiral. I heard her voice again, my mother, not a hallucination this time, but a memory so loud it echoed through my whole chest. If you ever feel like there's no way out, baby girl, you pray. That's when you pray the hardest. So I reached for the rosary again. My hands could barely close, but I found it, clutched it, like maybe God was holding the other end. Please, I whispered. I don't want to die here, not like this. I closed my eyes and begged for a sign, a sound, a miracle, anything. And that's when I saw it, a light, soft golden, moving through the trees above. Was it a search party? A headlight? My heart nearly burst from my chest. I pressed my face to the cracked window and screamed, but the light didn't move, didn't get closer. And slowly, it faded, just the sun bouncing off a patch of ice, nothing more. And still, somewhere in that crushing disappointment, I kept holding the beads, because even a fake light is better than none at all. By the third day, I couldn't feel most of my body. My fingers were too stiff to bend, my lips too cracked to speak. My stomach wasn't even hungry anymore. It just hurt. Everything hurt. But my mind, that was the worst part. It felt like it was fading. Like I was watching myself disappear in slow motion. Thoughts came in fragments. Faces I knew blurred. I couldn't remember what day it was or if the sun had come up. All I knew was dark, cold, and silence, and pain. I whispered once, just barely. God, I'm so tired. Not angry, not even scared anymore. Just tired. I said it like a child, a quiet surrender. I can't do this, I can't fight anymore. And I meant it. I looked down at the rosary in my hand, fingers barely gripping it now. My nails were blue. My skin had gone pale and stiff like wax. I thought about letting it go, just slipping into sleep, giving in. But then, something small, something strange, I don't know why, but I tightened my grip, just a little, just enough to feel one bead press into my palm. And in that second, everything stopped, because that tiny pressure reminded me, I was still here, still breathing, still alive, and somehow, that meant something. So I started praying again. Not because I thought God would crack open the sky and lift me out of that wreck. I prayed because it was the only thing keeping my mind from falling apart. I moved the beads slowly, clumsily, one by one, and with each bead, I said the same thing. God is still here, I am still alive. God is still here, I am still alive. Over and over, like a rhythm, like a heartbeat. Even when my voice went silent, I kept saying it in my head. Because when everything else had abandoned me, warmth, food, light, even hope, those words were the only thing that stayed. I didn't know how much longer I could last. But I knew I wasn't letting go. Not yet, not like this. I closed my eyes because I couldn't keep them open anymore. Not out of choice, just surrender. My breath had grown shallow, chest rising only enough to whisper frost on the inside of the windshield. My heartbeat felt like a distant drum, faint, tired, slowing down. I wasn't afraid of dying anymore. I was just done. And so I let go. Let my body melt into the wreckage. Let the cold take over. Let death take its turn. But just as I began to slip into that deep, terrifying quiet, something pierced the dark, a flash, barely there, but real, a light, cutting through the ice-caked glass like a match in a tunnel. I didn't understand at first. I thought it was another hallucination, another cruel trick of the brain, until I heard it, a voice, muffled, male, yelling, and then, my name, Emily. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even lift my head, but my heart did something I hadn't felt in days. It surged, it fought. The next few moments were a blur, boots crunching on snow, a flashlight sweeping inside the wreck, the cracking of ice as they pried open the door, hands, warm human hands, pulling me into blinding daylight. I remember someone gasping, "She's still alive, Jesus, how the hell?" Blankets, oxygen, a blur of uniforms and static radios. I wanted to cry, but couldn't. My body had spent all it had. Later, I'd learned that a snowplow driver spotted an unusual trail off the edge of the road, just a slight indentation in the powder. He thought it was nothing, but something told him to stop, to look, to climb down. Call it instinct, call it luck. I call it God, because he didn't come in thunder. He came in a beam of light, and a stranger who listened to something deep enough to save a life. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic, the sound of beeping monitors, and a dull, aching weight in every part of my body. It took me a moment to realize I wasn't in the wreck anymore. I wasn't frozen, or dying, or alone. I was warm, wrapped in blankets, breathing, alive. A nurse noticed my eyes fluttering open and gasped, "Oh my God, she's awake, she's awake." Soon voices surrounded me, doctors, machines, questions I couldn't quite understand. I blinked slowly, lips too dry to form full sentences, but I managed to whisper, "I didn't die." One of the doctors leaned in gently, her voice trembling as she said, "Emily, we almost lost you. Your body temperature was critically low. You were dehydrated, malnourished. You survived 3 days in sub-zero conditions with no food, no water. How you're still here is, honestly, it's a miracle. A miracle." I just nodded, and I said what I knew in my bones. I prayed. That's why I'm still here. The nurse nearest to me paused, her eyes welled with tears. She wasn't just hearing words, she felt them. Because what happened to me wasn't just survival. It wasn't just medical. It was spiritual. They told me I had been found just in time, minutes, maybe less, from cardiac arrest due to hypothermia. The EMTs said I was barely responsive when they reached me. My blood pressure was crashing. My hands had gone bluish-gray. They said no one could have lasted that long in those conditions. But I did. And as I lay there, too weak to cry, too tired to speak more than a sentence, I just kept thinking. I didn't hold on because I was strong. I held on because something greater than me wouldn't let go. The rosary beads, they found them still clutched in my hand, frozen into my grip. One nurse whispered that she'd never seen anything like it in her 20 years of trauma care. And in that moment, surrounded by machines, bandages, strangers and scrubs, I felt closer to God than I ever had in my entire life, not because I was healed, but because I had been held. I didn't walk out of that hospital the same person who went into the mountains 3 days before Christmas. Something inside me had cracked wide open, then filled with something new, something permanent. Before the accident, I was like most people, rushing through life, buried in my phone, complaining about traffic, taking time for granted, like it was some kind of unlimited credit card. But now, every single second felt borrowed, sacred. I started seeing the world differently. The way light hits the window in the morning, the sound of a stranger holding the door, even the tears of a tired mother in the grocery line. It all meant something now. Because I knew what it felt like to slip beyond the edge of life and be pulled back by something I couldn't explain. I kept the rosary by my bed, not as a souvenir, but as a symbol of why I was still breathing. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it was purpose. And so I began to live with that in mind. I volunteered at shelters. I spoke with young women going through hard times. I visited people in hospice, just to hold their hand. I didn't have answers, but I had presence, and sometimes, that's all someone needs. People started hearing about my story. At first, just a few friends. Then someone posted about it online. And then, it spread. I was invited to speak at a small church outside town. I was nervous at first. What did I know about preaching? But they didn't want a sermon. They just wanted truth. So I stood at the front, heart pounding, and I told them everything. The snow, the wreck, the prayers, the moment I gave up, and the light that found me anyway. And when I looked up, people were crying. Some were holding rosaries. Others just nodded, like they understood something without needing to say it out loud. It turns out, when you survive death, your life becomes a mirror. People look at you, and they don't just see you. They see hope. They see God. And I realized, maybe that's why I was kept alive. Not to go back to the life I had, but to live the life I was meant for. Not everybody gets a second chance, but I did, and I wasn't going to waste it. They told me his name was Jack, a former firefighter, mid-50s, quiet. The kind of man who doesn't talk much, but whose presence fills a room. I asked to meet him. No, I needed to meet him. He saved my life, and I needed to look him in the eyes and say it out loud. We met in the hospital lobby a few days after I was discharged. I was still moving slow, wrapped in too many layers, my body thinner and more fragile than I remembered. But my heart felt heavy with purpose. He stood as I walked in. Tall, weathered face, hands rough from years of service and loss. When I said Jack, he just nodded and smiled softly. We sat. And, for a moment, we didn't say anything. Then I whispered, "Why did you stop that day?" He took a breath, looked down. "I was on my way back from a funeral," he said. "A buddy of mine from the old station. Car accident, black ice, same kind of storm." There was a long pause. "I don't know why," he continued, eyes distant. "But something in my gut told me to take the long road home. I was driving past that ridge when I saw, well, not much, just a strange dip in the snow. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I almost didn't, but I stopped, backed up, got out, and when I climbed down and saw that car upside down in the trees," his voice cracked. "I just knew." I sat there stunned. If he'd taken the highway or driven 5 minutes earlier, or ignored that gut feeling, I'd be a name in the paper, a statistic. Instead, I was sitting across from him, breathing. "You didn't just find me," I said, voice shaking. "You brought me back." He looked uncomfortable. "I didn't do much. You were barely breathing when I got to you. Honestly, I thought you were gone. But you didn't leave." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You turned around, you climbed down, you chose to look. That wasn't an accident. That was grace." He looked away, blinking fast. We sat in silence again, this time, not because we had nothing to say, but because we both understood something too big to name. That moment, two strangers, bound by snow, by instinct, by something divine, wasn't coincidence. I never believed in fate before, but I do now, because sometimes the wrong turn is the only road that saves a life. And I will never forget the man who found me, not just with his eyes, but with his heart. If you ask me why I survived, why I'm still breathing, still walking this earth when everything said I shouldn't be, I only have one answer. I prayed. And God heard me. That's it. No magic, no formula, no grand miracle in the sky, just me, frozen, broken, bleeding, whispering the same words over and over through chattering teeth and cracked lips. "Please God, don't let me die like this." And he didn't. I've thought a lot about why. Why me when so many others don't make it? I don't know, but I do know this. Not everyone walks away from a crash like mine. But anyone can come back to faith. Even if it's been years. Even if you've cursed God or run so far you forgot how to pray. Even if you feel too damaged, too far gone, too forgotten. You're not. I wasn't special. I was just a woman in the dark, holding on to a rosary like it was the last thread tying me to this world. And maybe it was. But when the sun rose again, when I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, heart still beating, I realized something I'll never forget. Faith doesn't always save you from the fire. Sometimes it saves you through it. And now, every morning, I sit on my porch with a blanket around my shoulders, holding that same rosary. The metal beads are cold, worn smooth from the hours they spent in my hands down in that ravine. I say the same prayer first thing, every day. Thank you for one more breath. Not because I take it for granted, but because I don't. This is my story, not just of survival, but of surrender, not just of pain, but of presence. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, whoever you are, and you're lost, tired, or standing in the middle of your own storm, I want you to know something. You are not alone. And your prayer? It's being heard. Because I'm still here. And I know who kept me here.